Gaming giants play at E3 2016.
While Apple puts its cards on the table at its Worldwide Developer Conference. Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm here with a man who's already running iOS 11, but only in his head, Alex Kidman. We're also joined by a man who we tore kicking and screaming away from the Sydney Film Festival, PC Mag Australia editor Matthew Powell. Matthew, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Alex, what's new in tech?
Labor has finally unveiled its NBN policy before the upcoming federal election, and to the surprise of absolutely nobody, it's a more fibre-rich NBN plan that calls for the existing fibre-to-the-node rollout to convert back to the fibre-to-the-premises. Not so for HFC cable, however, which will stay cable due to existing contract obligations.
Samsung has launched its mobile payment system in Australia, compatible with its Note 5, Galaxy S6 and Galaxy S7 range of smartphones. Samsung Pay is compatible with American Express and Citibank cards, letting users swipe their phones to pay at the counter. Plus, it can mimic older MagSwipe cards to work with older terminals and loyalty card systems.
Sticking with Samsung, they'll be rather happy with Samsung's latest sales figures from Kantar, which suggests that it's now got a commanding grip on the Aussie smartphone buying market. 36.5% of all smartphones in Australia sold in the last 3 months bore a Samsung badge, although Apple's iPhone 6 is still the most popular single model, with 10.8% of the market to itself.
Aussie personal video recorder and pay TV box Fetch TV has gained access to Foxtel's Presto subscription video service to sit alongside Netflix and Stan. Fetch TV is also getting access to 9Now, completing the set so users can tap into catch-up TV from all 5 of Australia's major free-to-air broadcasters. So, Alex, you mentioned that Labor's finally unveiled its NBN plan. How does it look for people who are hoping for a bit more fibre in their diet?
Well, conditional, of course, upon election results, presuming they come to power, presuming they stick with the plan that they say they're going to stick with, and this is politics where anything can happen, then for a certain proportion of the market, it's actually looking like you will have a more fibre-rich diet because they've signalled that they are committed to the idea of not doing fibre to the node where they can avoid it, and instead the fibre to the node portions of the network will transfer as is sensibly feasible, and that's going to be complicated too, over to fibre to the premises, but not so if you're part of the multi-technology mix that was going to be using HFC cable, because apparently the negotiations are too far along to change that, and it will be cable for the foreseeable future.
So, in a nutshell, basically, if you were getting fibre to the node, you're now probably going to get fibre to the premises. If you're getting HFC cable, you're still getting HFC cable. And if you're getting fibre to the premises, then I'm very jealous.
And if you're on satellite or fixed wireless, then you're actually pretty much always on those anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whose plan it was going to be the same. So, Matthew, how does that affect your house? What are you on now, and what might you get depending on who wins the election?
Oh, look, at the moment, I'm in an area that's designated to be flattened and turned into medium-density housing in the next few years anyway, so it doesn't affect me in a particularly profound way, but just the other side of the railway line from me, it's all sort of fibre to the node, which, you know, the people who live on the other side of the railway line, the other side of the tracks, the what do you call them, rich people.
Yeah, those people, yeah.
Those people, they will be very happy should Labour pull off an electoral miracle and actually win this one, because they'll be getting a better internet. Look, at the moment, I've got Telstra cable. I get, 80 odd megabits per second downstream anyway, most of the time. So I'm not sure that I'd be much affected by the change. But in terms of NBN connectivity, yeah, the area I'm in is shortly to be a greenfields anyway.
So that should be a fibre to the premises, even if, in fact, the coalition maintains.
Not necessarily. Now, see,
not necessarily. The people on the other side of the railway line should have been fibre to the premises as well, but they're not. But they're fibre to the node.
Labor said if it wins government, then it will make sure that all new greenfield sites actually are fibre to the premises. Whereas at the moment, it's a bit of a crapshoot depending on who wants to put up the money and what the developer wants to do. So the people who are going to move in to live where you live now might be better off under Labor because they will definitely get fibre to the premises, whereas at the moment, it's anybody's guess.
Exactly.
Which is interesting, of course, because a lot of the early fibre to the node results show that it's not really delivering what's expected of it. So, in fact, they could go from a situation where they're getting cable, and cable is a shared medium and can have all sorts of problems, and I'm on it as well. But could go from a situation where they're getting cable, and in fact, they get switched to a worse NBN connection.
But Labor has also said that it will at least investigate the idea of transitioning people on fibre to the node to fibre to the premises further down the track. So its long-term plan is basically to have the nation split between people on the HFC networks and everyone else, except for you, a few on satellite and wireless, but everyone else on fibre to the premises. So their long-term plan is to basically eliminate fibre to the node.
And look, if you're talking about long-term, eventually the HFC cable is going to have to be replaced as well. So, the long-term plan is everybody's going to end up on fibre to the premises. Whoever wins this term of government, we're not talking about the next 3 years, we're talking about the next 20.
Yeah, but it was in the short term, it's too late to turn their back on HFC cable now because the deals are done.
Absolutely.
And most of the customers they say that they're going to sign up in the next 12 months are all coming from HFC. If they chuck that away now and start from scratch, we'll put them back years, not just in terms of the rollout, but in terms of new paying customers that'll actually help the whole thing turn over. So it would be madness at this point to throw away the HFC cable network and try and start from scratch.
Exactly, be a waste of money.
So Adam and Matthew, at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, Apple had a lot to say about software. Not so much to say about hardware as yet, but that was no great surprise. When you're surrounded by software developers, it makes sense to talk about software. First cab off the rank would have to be the fact that Mac OS X is no longer Mac OS X, is it?
Well, I mean, the naming convention for it has changed so many times. It's nice that now at least it's going to be consistent with the other operating systems that Apple has. Remember that up until System 7.5, it wasn't called Mac OS. They called Mac OS 7.6 was the first one that actually was called Mac OS, and that was because they were going to license it to people. And then when OS 10, when they changed to Mac OS 10, which wasn't a version of Mac OS. It had no sort of common code with Mac OS. It was a version of Next Step. It was a version of Unix. They called it Mac OS X or Mac OS 10 to kind of give people a psychological sense of continuity. There was no actual, it wasn't an update or a version of the thing. And then, it's been Mac OS X or Mac OS 10 up until... what was it? Mountain Lion was the first one that they called OS X instead of Mac OS X. So now they've brought the Mac back. They've dropped the X. It's kind of chopped and changed so many times over the years that it's hard to say that it's that big a deal. The thing that is kind of interesting about it is that it's all lowercase now. Are they going to start using lowercase for the M on the front of a Macintosh?
Heathens.
The lowercase thing bugs me far more than it should. But naming conventions aside, there's also some underlying new software here, including the thing that kind of everyone called that they would do at some point, which is to integrate Siri. But do we care? Is this going to be some big world-changing event, excluding those, obviously, who have issues with computer interfaces for other physiological problems?
I think it might be, actually. I don't use Siri much on my iPhone. I've never found much of a use for Siri past being a novelty. But I'm wondering if actually on my Mac, on my desktop, whether it could be useful. It kind of depends on how it will let me do things. I didn't see what the demos were, but if I could be typing away in a document and say, hey Siri, create a doctor's appointment for me on Tuesday at 10 o'clock, and know that it would be done without me having to switch away from what I'm doing, or, hey Siri, what am I doing tomorrow? And it reads it back to me. That would be useful. But if every time I say, hey Siri, it steals the spotlight and then takes me over to whatever application I'm talking about, I probably could have done that myself. So to me, I think that would be the test as whether or not Siri will actually be useful as a productivity tool.
So what you're saying is you want Siri to call your GP with your embarrassing personal problems?
I want Siri to let me keep doing what I'm doing while that happens.
And yes, have Siri call your GP with whatever it interprets as what you said your problem was.
That could be a bit of a problem.
Yeah. Adam has a automobile in his orifice.
We've all been there.
Yes.
Hang on a second.
1 in a million shot, Doc.
Yeah, look, I think more than bringing Siri to the Mac is opening up Siri to as APIs to developers.
Yeah.
So that bring it to the Mac, but also let people build on it, so that it does more than just the core functionality that Apple decides to give it. Let's see what other people can do with it. Now, if Apple manages to keep the capacity of its servers on the sort of processing side able to handle the number of requests that are going to be coming through, once they've done that, then that'll be great. But I'll be interested to see what how developers integrate Siri functionality into Mac applications.
It's a very cool step, and I mean it's across iOS as well, so it's Siri everywhere in a way. But if I was an Apple developer, I'd be a little bit cautious on this one, of course, because the other thing, you could build some cool new functionality for Siri that Apple hadn't thought of and turn around and discover that it's actually now in iOS 11, and your app that's been making you money is suddenly redundant.
Because that's never happened before.
That is always the risk. That is always the risk, and it's whether you're an Apple developer, whether you're a Microsoft developer.
Totally true. Yes, absolutely true and fair.
It's absolutely always going to be the case. If you come up with a terrific idea, somebody's going to pinch it, and it might be the people that you think you're supporting.
Now, speaking of pinching ideas, actually, one of the things that really struck me with the keynote was they had some cool new functionality across iOS, across macOS. They had this idea that watchOS might actually respond when you tap on it. That's going to be great. Looking forward to that one. But they also had a lot of features which I felt were fairly derivative of existing features within Windows or existing features within Android. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not exactly new or innovative, is it?
No, it's not. It's a copying that's gone both ways. Google has pinched some stuff from Apple. Microsoft's pinched a lot of stuff from Apple, and Apple has pinched from Microsoft before, and Apple has pinched from Google before. These things go on. I think some of the things that I found interesting on the same sort of, well, this isn't new. Not so much in terms of copying, but in terms of a lot of the functionality that they're talking about for photos, about the geotagging and stuff like that, and facial recognition and sorting things into albums automatically. This is functionality that has been there before on the Apple platforms, but we're basically re-announcing it almost as if to say, hey, here's this feature that we announced a few years ago. It works now. You'll like it.
Well, that's because Google's doing so much. They talked so much at their recent developer conference about how machine learning and AI is underpinning all these things like smarter voice recognition, smarter image recognition, image matching and processing, all that kind of stuff. So to sort of be seen to be on par with that, Apple maybe has to point to some things that it already does, or as you say, maybe has managed to do better than it did in the past, and say, hey, yeah, look, we're doing that too, because that's a big push for Google in that area. And with its little home speaker that you can speak to, it's sort of in a way maybe trying to leapfrog what Siri does, and so they need to sometimes point to things they already do to say, remember that thing you got excited about last week that the other guy did? Well, yeah, we're doing that too.
Of course, you immediately get the response from a certain section of the internet community that says, "Oh, look, Apple's copying Google again." Apple, Gizmodo called Apple the perpetual copycat. It's like, do you not understand? Do you not read? Whatever.
And look, to a certain extent as well, of course, and this is kind of hopeful thinking in a way. One of the things that Apple, I think, has done well whilst being derivative is actually improving on some of those functions, making them slightly better than some of their competitors. Doesn't mean they're innovative or magical for that matter, but sometimes does mean that they're fairly well done.
But that's always been Apple's thing. Apple didn't invent MP3 players. It didn't invent a few things, but what it does is it takes an idea that's kicking around and needs a bit of polish and just gives it that tweak that it takes off.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, in terms of features that get us excited, am I the only one that's really, really, really excited about the prospect of finally being able to delete the damn stocks and weather app?
No, I don't think you're alone there.
No.
I thought you were going to say emoji and I was about to disown you, but no, you're not alone there.
No, there are street parties happening
As we speak.
all over the world as people say, I can get rid of Newsstand! I can delete Newsstand! Oh my god! This is such a great day!
At the same time, actually, I'm really surprised. If you read the list of the things that they will let you delete, they'll actually let you delete a lot of core functionality.
They will, but you will get a warning. You know, if you try to delete something that's going to break something else, like if you try to delete podcast app, it'll say, you know, you're not going to be able to listen to podcasts in your car anymore. So, you know, it will warn you if you're about to break something.
Sure, but I mean, it raises the bar on people getting hold of your phone and pranking you by reducing the usability of your phone massively if you don't already, for example, synchronize with a desktop. If you only set up your iPhone over the phone or an iPad on the pad itself, there's a certain level to which you could really screw someone over. Not that I'm advocating that people do this.
Well, and I would suggest to anybody who knows Alex and owns an iPhone, strengthen your passwords.
Yes.
Go into settings and go for the long password. Don't go for a simple password.
I have a trustworthy face,
Go for
Matthew.
something.
I stole it from that man down the road.
Yes.
So if they're going to let you delete all these default apps, will they let you switch what the default app is? Will they, and I'm guessing
No.
the answer is no, will they let me get rid of Safari and say I want Chrome to be my default browser?
Not at the moment. Not in the developer release. It may come further down the line, but at the moment it doesn't.
My understanding is if you delete a core app, like if you delete Mail, and then you click on something that is a Mail link, it will fundamentally say, look, you're going to need to go to the App Store and download Mail in order to use that link. And it would not surprise me if Apple just stuck to that anyway.
That's very Apple, yeah.
Yeah. Look, and that may change further down the line, but it's hard to see Apple doing that. It's one thing for them to let people only have one mail client. You know, if you really like the Gmail client, you don't like Apple's inbuilt mail app, and you know you use it fine, then sure, clear up some space. But you know, do understand you're not going to be able to get that same level of integration that you have with the core apps with a third-party app.
Now, I touched on this just a little bit earlier, but they also talked up the features in the next version of watchOS. I'm still in the position where I think the Apple Watch is a beautifully designed piece of hardware. It's very nice, it's very pretty, and I am looking forward to the idea that you might tap on an app and it might actually respond, because the thing is damn slow a lot of the time. But beyond that, I'm still not struck by an idea that they've made it into this compelling must-have object just because I can scribble characters on a screen. Again, am I alone in this?
No, look, I have found since the dawn of the smartphone that a wristwatch as a concept in and of itself is no longer a must-have object. I haven't worn a wristwatch for years because the only thing I ever needed it for was to know what time it was, and that's what my phone does for me. So the idea that I'm going to buy an Apple Watch because it'll tell me the time and do a whole bunch of other stuff that my phone does, it's not a compelling proposition for me. You know, when they come up with an Apple Watch that you don't need to have an iPhone paired to it in order to have functionality with it, then that becomes a more compelling device. But an Apple Watch that is just an adjunct to a phone, I don't see that as a compelling purchase, except for the desirability factor of I've got to have the latest Apple thing. If you're one of those people who needs to have the latest Apple thing, then well, sure. But aside from that, for most of us, I don't see it as a compelling purchase yet.
Yeah, I'm a little bit OCD about wearing a watch. I like wearing a watch. Yes, my phone can tell me the time.
But you wear like 7 wearables at a time.
This is true. This is true.
Weird.
I might be
You're
addicted.
a very strange person.
He's thinking of getting extra limbs added just so he can wear more wearables.
Finally, and again, kind of in a bit of a minor league of its own, Apple's also updating tvOS, but it didn't have a whole bunch to say about that beyond the fact that it's kind of admitting that the Siri remote might not be all that. And again, that's not a sterling vote of confidence in your hardware.
It's not all that. the remote control that came with the new Apple TV is a pain in the butt sometimes. You can't press
You're sitting
and
on it
hold
wrong.
a button. Yes, you can't press and hold a button when you want to scroll through a menu. If, for example, you're switching between
it wasn't
Australia...
automobile that he said to Siri. It wasn't. It was Apple TV remote, and Siri just thought it was automobile.
Yes. The doctor will fix it.
Yes.
But so you want to change regions from Australia to the United States for whatever reason you might want to do it. Why? What are you trying to say? Anyway, so you can't just hold your finger down on the button and scroll. You've got to keep going. Tap, 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 tap. Past Venezuela. Tap, tap, tap. Actually gone too far. Go back, tap, 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 tap. It's really annoying, that remote control sometimes. And to be able to actually pick up the iPhone and go flick to go through those menus would be a big improvement.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the new iOS remote myself. The present iOS remote app for Apple TV, which doesn't work on the current generation of Apple TV, has its own interface issues. There's some appalling interface design there that I would very much like to see fixed. So I hope that if the brain trust over at Cupertino is actually looking into it, I look forward to seeing some improvements.
So, Alex, E3 is happening in Los Angeles. It's the game industry's big expo of the year. What have you seen that grabs your fancy?
Well, it's been an interesting E3 this year because you've got the traditional kind of battleground between Microsoft and Sony and Nintendo, but they've all gone their own way in terms of what they're hyping.
Yeah.
So on the Microsoft front, they're talking hardware. They've got not one, but two new Xbox One models. One which is out next month, which is basically the existing model with a bit of a workout in terms of graphics and storage. And then you've got something they're calling Scorpio, which is not actually due out till next year, and that's the Xbox One on steroids. But they're seemingly abandoning the traditional console model, where when you get a completely new model, you give it a new name because it has new specifications and abilities. Instead, they're saying, no, Xbox One is where it's going to be, and if you've got a Scorpio machine, it'll run slightly better, faster, maybe better visuals, but if you've got an original launch Xbox One, it'll still run the same games. That's a really interesting prospect because it makes it very challenging for developers who I suspect are more going to go, well, there's the existing market of Xbox One consoles. If we write for that specification, it'll run on all of them.
It'll cover
Whereas if we spend the money to write something that'll, run spectacularly on Scorpio, then maybe it won't run quite so well on the One or at all. It's a big challenge, and it's a really interesting move, although it's still heavily suggested that Sony's going to go the same way with the PlayStation 4.
Are they still talking about a 4K PlayStation 4 that may or may not appear?
It may or may not appear. I think that's what we know at this point. What Sony was busy talking up, though, was VR, because, of course, it's got the PlayStation VR coming quite imminently, October the 13th in Australia, for essentially about the same price as you'll pay for a PlayStation 4. About $550 will score you one if you pre-order relatively quickly. And VR is, of course, that huge ecosystem building thing that everyone seems to be trying to do because HTC is doing it and Oculus is doing it. And we have discussed this before. Yeah. Sony's possibly got a better shot with it, of course, because it's already got an installed user base of PlayStation 4s and, critically, because its setup looks to be significantly easier and lower cost than an Oculus or a Vive with a compatible PC.
It's got the ecosystem going in its favour. It might not be the most technically impressive of the bunch, but if you get a PlayStation and you get a headset and you get a game and you put them all together, you can be pretty sure that they'll work. Unlike the others where, maybe your graphics card's not up to it, or maybe this or maybe that. So in terms of the whole package, I think PlayStation VR is the one to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same kind of situation that Microsoft had when they were promoting Media Center PCs. Great in concept, but so many different complexities to take into consideration. And the last thing you want to do if you're going to slip on a VR headset is for your antivirus software to suddenly flash up and say, oh, actually, I'm just checking this and I'm going to be taking all your CPU cycles away for that.
Yeah. Go
That's
make yourself
really
a virtual cup of tea while I sort this out.
Yeah.
So, Matthew, what's your interest in VR? Is there anything you've seen in terms of headsets or stuff that grabs your interest?
Oh, look, I had a play with a HTC Vive a few weeks ago, and my kids also had a play with it, and they've been begging me for one since. It's just fantastic. I played Fruit Ninja
cool.
on the HTC Vive, and it's just amazing. just an incredible experience. So, I'm interested to see what other vendors bring out. So far, of the VR systems that I've used, which mainly I think being the Samsung Gear and the HTC Vive. The HTC Vive is a more comfortable headset, more better designed headset. Maybe just for my head, I don't know. But I'll be interested to see what Sony comes out with, and I'll be interested to see if Apple makes any play in VR. I was a little bit surprised at the WWDC not to hear really any mention of that. I mean, as Alex was saying, it's a software conference, not a hardware conference. But still, it would have been interesting to hear that Apple had some thoughts on the subject, just given the scale of what VR is in the rest of the industry.
But as we said before, Apple sometimes tend to sit back a little bit and let others do the early work and sort of establish the interest, that establish the market, look at what people are doing and saying, right, here's how we can tweak this to make it better. So do you think that maybe Apple's going to sit back for a little bit longer and see what works and what doesn't?
Possibly.
See, I guess the other big challenge there for Apple is they've got to decide which way to jump. If they go down the Samsung Gear VR route, that's right, well, we'll sell iPhones, and we sell plenty of those, but then the experience is nowhere near as good because you just don't have the tracking hardware, you don't have the processing power to pull off the kind of stuff that the HTC Vive can do. The alternative is that they say, right, we will start building this into Macs, but they're selling, fewer Macs than they are iPhones by a massive factor. It's not as big a market, and obviously they'd also have to seriously pump up the specs of most Macs outside the Mac Pros, and who can afford a Mac Pro anyway?
And an Apple TV, I would assume, is not going to have the grunt to do something like that. If they could hang it off the Apple TV, that'd be a great combination for them, but I would think the hardware's not there.
You could perhaps hang a Gear VR-esque experience off an Apple TV but I wouldn't want to push it.
Yeah, depending. I mean, on the current generation of Apple TV, obviously, yes, that's the case. But some future Apple TV that's designed with VR in mind, who knows?
That would make more sense, I think, than as Alex says, trying to run it off a Mac.
The final big player in the game space is Nintendo, and of course, they're historically the gaming brand, but they then took a really interesting approach with this E3, because E3 is all about games, and they went to E3 with one game. Just one. The latest iteration of the Legend of Zelda franchise, which they're now calling Breath of the Wild. And that in itself is a kind of interesting strategy, both because they've got a new console, the NX, which they will release next year, but this apparently will come out for both the existing Wii U and the NX, which creates this big problem for them because the Wii U has not sold anywhere near what they wanted it to. But at the same time, if you're a big Zelda fanatic, do you just splurge on the NX when it comes out, or do you buy the Wii U? Or do you just go, well, Nintendo's only got one game to show me and everyone else has got 50?
Yeah, there's always that argument about, is there one game that's good enough to actually inspire you to go out and buy a console? And as you say, for some people, if they have to have every iteration of the franchise, then perhaps that will seal the deal for them.
That E3... can be such an avalanche of releases that any individual release can tend to get lost in the flood. And so if you really want to have to bet the farm on something, and I think Nintendo probably is at the point, given the very, very disappointing sales of Wii U, they are at the point of betting the farm. The last thing they would want to do is for their big thing, and a new release of Zelda is a big thing. They don't want that to be lost. They don't want that to be a footnote in anybody's report. So, it's going to be the headline, hey, there's a new Zelda. Maybe this will drive some console sales.
Well, that just about wraps it up for this episode of Vertical Hold. Remember, if you've got any comments, hit us up in the comments section on YouTube, via Twitter, or the Facebook Vertical Hold page. Thanks to Matthew for joining us again this week.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks everyone for listening. Remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button.